Hello, we were modeling the case study of traffic lights controller and we have successfully modeled the structural aspects so far in the block definition diagram of SysML. So now we will be modeling the timer. To model a timer, we will be using a UML activity diagram. First of all, we should know about the timer, that how the timer works and what is basically the timer. The timer is used for producing the time delays. It can also be used to repeat or initiate an action after or at a period of time which is known period. The example of the timer can be an alarm which triggers after a period of time or at a point of time. So let's move to the modeling of the timer. To model a timer, we will be using an activity diagram as I have just mentioned. So we have to model the timer inside the timer block as we have modeled here in the block definition diagram. So to add a UML activity diagram inside the timer block, go to the Model Explorer window on the left side of the UML editor. Here is the Model Explorer window. Search for the timer block and here it is. To add a UML activity diagram inside the timer block, right click on the timer block, then go to the new diagram and then search for the UML activity diagram. So here it is. Create a new UML activity diagram. Click on this. Then a new window will be opened up which will ask you for the diagram name. So you can rename it as well and you can use the default name, that is activity diagram also. So I am renaming it as timer activity and press OK. Now the UML activity diagram has been created. You can also see it from the Model Explorer. Open this small triangular button on the left side of the timer block. Here is the UML activity diagram, timer activity we have just created. So your activity diagram has been created. You can resize your activity by just dragging it as much you want. So your activity diagram has been created. You can also rename the activity. Just to rename the activity, just click on the activity, go to the properties tab, and then in the properties tab go to the UML tab. As you can see, there are many other tabs like comments, profiles, style, appearance, rulers and grids, etc. So to rename it, go to the UML tab. In the name section, select the name whatever you want. Let's say I'm renaming it as timer. Okay, now you can see that it is renamed to timer here. Okay, now on the left side of diagram you can see that there is a palette which contains two compartments. One is the nodes compartment and the other one is edges compartment. In the nodes compartment there is some nodes, pins, actions, etc. And in the edges section there is a control flow and object flow. The control flow and object flow basically links the actions of the activity to one another, because after all, a UML activity diagram is a flow-based behavior of the system. So now you can see that there are buttons on the left side of the UML activity diagram components inside the palette node section of the palette, because in the node in the nodes all the nodes of UML activity diagram are here inside the initial node section. You can open it from the triangular button on the left of the initial node. Click on that triangular button, then this small window, then its tree view will be shown, and you can see that all nodes are present here, and you can use whatever node you want to use. Similarly, you want to use actions, just open up the create object action section and you can see the related actions, and similarly for all these actions. Now we will be starting the modeling of the timer. So for that we have to first create an initial node, because every activity diagram starts from the initial node, so it is compulsory to add an initial node before modeling of the activity diagram. Okay, so to add an initial node, go to the nodes section of the palette, search for the initial node. Here it is. Just drag and drop it on the editor of activity diagram here. Okay, now the initial node has just been created. You can also rename it as whatever you want to rename it. Go to the UML tab, go to the select the initial node, then go to the properties, and then go to the UML tab, and you can rename it here. I'm not renaming it, I'm using the default name for this. So now we need to use a decision node. A decision node basically is a node which selects one of the outgoing edge from the multiple edges. The decision node basically has only one incoming edge and multiple outgoing edges, and it selects one of those multiple edges for the flow based on the guard condition, which turns to be true. Whichever guard condition is true, the activity takes that path instead of the others. So to add a decision node, it is also important to note here that a decision node can only have one incoming edge and multiple outgoing edges, and there should be no condition on incoming edge. There should be no guard condition on the incoming edge, and the outgoing edges can have guard conditions. So to add a decision node, open up the node section, go to the node section of the palette, then open this section, and here the decision node is. Just drag and drop it onto the editor. So you can also rename it from here. I'm not renaming it, I'm using the default name. Okay, we've used the decision node here because we want to run this activity in a loop, kind of loop, because we want the execution of this activity diagram unless the timer reaches its maximum count. Otherwise it should run repeatedly. it should execute repeatedly until it reaches its maximum count. This will be clear when this activity model will be completed. So now we have used two components, the initial node and the decision node. Now we have to use the control flow. To use a control flow, go to the edges section of the palette. Here is the control flow. Select the control flow and drop it onto the element from where you want to start the control flow, and end it, and drop it on the element where you want to end that control flow, like this. Okay, so now we have to use an accept event action. An accept event action is basically an action which waits for an event to occur before it passes the control to the next. An accept event action, to add an accept event action into your UML activity diagram, go to the node section of the palette and search for the accept event action, and here it is. Just drag and drop it onto the palette. You can rename it whatever you want. I'm not renaming it, and I don't want to use any name for this action. Okay, this is basically an accept event action. Now accept event action is used here in our timer model because we want to introduce the delay. Now to introduce a delay in time, we have to trigger it by the time event, because when we trigger the accept event action by a time event, it behaves like a wait time action. The wait time action basically waits for a preset time before passing the control to the next. Now to trigger it by a time event, select the time accept event action, go to the properties tab, scroll down, and here is the trigger section. Now we have to trigger it by the time event. To trigger it, click this plus button and a new window will come up which will ask you to create a new trigger. Now we have to trigger it by the time event. So in the event section, click this plus button. Now it will then ask you whether you want to trigger it by receive event, call event, change event, signal event, or time event. So we are interested in time event. Click on the time event. It will then ask you for the container for the time event. The container basically means that where this time event will be located or contained in the model explorer. So click this button, select SysML model. Okay. Then a new window will be opened which will be asking for a creation of a new time event. Then to create a new time event, in the when expression, click this button. A new window will come up which is basically the creation of new time expression. And then in the expression section, click the plus button and it will then ask you for the number of possibilities. So select the opaque expression. A new window will come up. That is a creation of new opaque expression because we were writing the time event in as an opaque expression. So you first have to select a language for the opaque expression. To select a language, click this button it will then ask you for the language you want to select. Let's say I'm selecting a natural language. You can select whatever you want. Then click forward arrow button and then OK. The editor of the natural language is opened. Now you can add the time whatever you want. For example, but the value should be integer because time is in integer values. So you can add 1 or 2 or 3 or 33 or whatever. So I want to add a 1 second delay. So I'm just writing it 1 because the default unit is second. Then click OK and OK and OK and OK. Now the shape of accept event action has been changed to an hourglass, which clearly denotes that it is now behaving like a wait time action. So now I need to use the control flow. To add a control flow, go to the edges section of the palette, select the control flow and drop it onto the element from where you want to start the control flow. So I'm dropping it on the decision node because the control is now here on the decision box. So I want to pass the control from decision box to the wait time action. Okay. So now I want to use the read self action. The read self action basically is an action which reads the context object and passes it next through its result pin. So to add a read self action, go to the node section of the palette, search for the read self action. It is not shown here directly in the palette. So open up the expansion region, and it's not here. Open up the broadcast signal action, it's not here. Open up create object action, and here it is, read self action. So just drag and drop it onto the palette. Read self action, you can rename it as whatever you want. I'm not renaming it, I'm using the default name. Okay. The read self action basically reads the context object. Here the context object is basically the timer because the activity we are modeling is inside the timer block. So the context object is the timer object. So it reads the timer object and passes it next through its result pin, which clearly means that it read self action should have a result pin. So select the read self action, go to the properties tab and then UML tab of properties. Okay, here is the result pin. So to create a result pin, click plus button and then it asks you for the multiple different properties to set for this result pin. I'm using the default properties. You can change these properties like visibility, ordering, multiplicity according to your need. So I am naming it as result and then click OK. Okay, so cancel it. It's just the window you have seen last is opened because I have mistakenly clicked on this button, edit output pin. So I don't want to edit it, cancel. So the result pin has been created. You can move it wherever you want feasible. Okay, now I want to use a control flow again, because right now the control is here and I want to pass the control to the read self action to start the execution of read self action, because unless the control is passed to the read self action, the read self action will not start execution and the control remains here until we pass it to the next. So we need to use the control flow here. So to add the control flow, go to the edges section of the palette, select the control flow and drop it onto the element from where you want to pass the control, and drop it where you want to end that control flow. Okay, so this was basically the timer activity. We have modeled the 25% of the timer model. The rest of the model will be explained in the next video. Thank you.